right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's conversation is going to be all about comfort management systems, and it is part of an ongoing monthly webinar series that we are doing this year, just being called Lunch and Learns, and it is being sponsored by a division of KMC called KMC Consulting. Some of you may have been expecting Ari due to a scheduling conflict. Many of us are down here in Tampa for the RealComm IBCon event. He was unable to moderate, so I will be covering for Ari as best as I can. Please feel free to utilize the chat if you have any questions towards the end. We'll make sure to take a look at those and enjoy a conversation. And you could ask it of the team in general, or you could ask it of an individual person, and I'll be moderating those questions. So to get started, I'll do a brief introduction of myself, and then I'll introduce each of our guests here to allow them to introduce themselves. So my name is Tim Vogel. I am the VP of Connected Solutions for KMC Controls. It's a pleasure to be with you today and to talk about this, because what I often find myself doing is talking about bringing these exact kind of data points and these exact kind of use cases to the cloud so that you're able to see and manage it, as well as doing a little bit of cybersecurity connected to this as well. Jesse, could you introduce yourself and a little bit about what you do?
Yep. My name is Jesse Shoemaker. Pleased to be sharing some time with everyone this afternoon. My role with KMC is business development, and primary focus of what I do for the organization is just to discuss our airflow measurement system product, but I also have the pleasure of working with a number of OEMs across the globe and some of our control contracting partners that are based here in the Midwest.
Wonderful. Clifford.
Thanks, Tim. Clifford Milligan with KMC as well. I'm Vice President of Sales on the West Coast. I cover the system contractors and system distributors for KMC. My background is definitely in the comfort management system, building automation world as a contractor. So that's kind of where I focus and help our contractors with our products.
Stuart.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stuart Feilden. I work for Siemens. Part of the global team, I lead our digital strategy for global enterprise customers. Been in the automation business about 20 years as of last month, and most of that career, majority of the career is direct for the various manufacturers, the large manufacturers in the industry. Remote employee, directly work for Siemens, and happy to be here with you guys today.
And this is the second panel that Stuart and I have been able to participate on together this week. Earlier this week, I mentioned we were at RealComm IBCon, and we talked about the technology journey of a building between pre-commissioning, design, and engineering, all the way through decommissioning. It was a whirlwind panel, but all the content was absolutely fascinating. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here again with you, Stuart. And Jason.
Good to see you, Tim.
Good day, everyone. My name is Jason Nefs. I am President and CEO of Long Building Technologies. We are an SI in the West, Pacific Northwest, got operations in 7 states. Additionally, on top of being a controls contractor, we are a security access contractor, as well as an equipment rep, manufacturer's rep, and do a bunch of mechanical service with all of that. So,
yeah, wonderful. Jason, you and your organization are huge partners of KMC, have been for a long time, and we really appreciate you being here today. As one more note before we dive into the conversation, this is being recorded, and so anything that may get missed in transmission, if there's a loss in signal or anything like that, we are capturing it, and so it will be made available, and we'll all be able to see it in beautiful quality once it's released on YouTube, likely sometime next week. All right, so to kick us off, Jason, I'm actually going to start with you. Comfort management systems, is that really a term that you use often? Is it a term maybe that was used more in the past, or let's just talk about the term in general, comfort management systems. Is that really something you're going out and selling or pitching?
I'm going to say no.
Yeah.
I think that the customers, the client base out there that's sophisticated is well past that term. And those that aren't, we would just talk, more simply about control of, and really probably wouldn't be so specific to say, hey, I want to come out and talk to you about a comfort management system. 3 words, a lot more than one. Just saying, hey, we want to come out and help you control your building. We want to come out, help take care of your temperature, your humidity, your lighting, whatever those might be. I'd say that we're probably more commonly a little more specific.
Yeah.
In that generic
When
term.
I think of a comfort management system, I think of a lot of sort of um, legacy taglines. Helping you build your comfort zone. I know was one that was popular with KMC many years ago, and then a lot of company names, even the focus around comfort. So then, Stuart, my next question for you is: obviously, comfort is an important aspect of what we do. But where do you think it ranks in priority overall when we're going and talking to customers?
That's a good question. I do believe it's actually shifted a bit. One of the trends post-COVID is it was there before COVID, but really post-COVID, it's accelerated, especially in the conversations that I've been in. Is the experience of the occupant? That was a big conversation on our panel yesterday. Was the human experience, right? And one of the guys presented Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Which I think was a really good way to intro it. So, I like to say when I started my career 20 years ago, I had a cubicle, it was dirty, there was no fresh light, the office was stale. And then just look at the explosion of healthy buildings and smart building rating systems, the well standard, LEED, those didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago. And then post COVID, part of it, I think there's a demographic component that we all see. So the experience of the occupants, the customers of the company, that is absolutely changed in the last number of years, and is certainly accelerating, which ties back obviously to the traditional HVAC controls and building automation systems.
Yeah, Clifford, when you think of a building automation system as a whole, comfort comes up quite often. But where do you place it, sort of in the priority levels of all the other things that the end use cases that a BMS provides?
Yeah, I agree with Stuart. I think the comfort part of it has come back, especially depending on the vertical that you're talking with. Comfort's always been number one in the medical sector, but when you get into institutional and other areas where it's a little bit more energy, or they try to balance out the comfort and the energy side of it as best they can. But comfort has always been the prime reason. The reason why they design HVAC in buildings is for comfort and ventilation, is to make people feel safe and comfortable to do their work. So I say it's probably the very first thing that we do for building automation is provide comfort and control. So.
Yeah. Jesse, could you give us a rundown a little bit on what some of the maybe historical or new things around ASHRAE guidelines and how those impact things like comfort?
Yeah, it's another good question. If you look at just the giant playbook that ASHRAE provides, there's a number of different codes that are related to temperature, humidity, number of occupants in its space. I would say all of those components are going into what could be defined as that occupant experience or comfort management. But when you start drilling into how the specific ASHRAE codes apply, a lot of them generally tie back to 2 outcomes. It's energy efficiency or indoor air quality. And we could follow those through guideline standard 62.1 relative to indoor air quality, or 90.1 for energy efficiency. 189.1, I think that ties well into Stuart's comments about building readiness, looking at the life cycle of a building from design to decommission. And then ASHRAE standards 170, kind of a little more critical air exchange rates for not only occupant comfort, but also for mitigating transmissibility of disease, and also ensuring that critical systems remain operational. And then I'd say the most recent one has been ASHRAE standard 241, which involves the control of hazardous aerosols in the built environment.
Hmm. Jason, coming back to you, you guys have done a phenomenal job of rolling in analytics into your service and into the products and solutions that you provide to your customers. What role does analytics play in affecting the comfort in a space?
Well, I think it is not quite there yet, but where we're headed with it is to really take place of that building engineer who was Johnny on the spot in our old world and would either get maybe the call or he'd get a red, symbol pop up on his computer and he would quickly jump on it. The analytics has taken that place in that those people aren't in those buildings anymore, a lot of ours. And so you need this other entity, this other ability to figure out what's going on and what might be the most critical thing. So I think that is a really big part of it. Also, I think the ability to look into the future and make some kind of prediction on what could be happening rather than waiting for it to break. That is really where we're finding a lot of stickiness and success and a very happy client that didn't really expect that. I think that's a promise we've made to the industry for a really long time is that we're going to predict that your damper, is going to go bad before it goes bad and we'll get it replaced. And we've missed that mark for many years, I think. And we're getting a lot closer to being able to do that. Or even just acknowledge that things are acting funny. That why is that, why do we have that much outside air there? That's a weird thing. I wonder what's going on. So just vision, I think vision into what's going on and acknowledgement and communication to people that aren't in the building, but maybe can do something about it with our ability to log into that system and whatnot. So
It seems oftentimes, anytime comfort is affected, that is just merely a symptom of something deep, much deeper down, right? And so you talk about the call. It's that hot, cold call. It's like, I'm cold. Okay, this could be a quick, I'll be there for 30 minutes, or I'm going to be there all day and probably have to come back tomorrow to finish up. It really just absolutely depends on what that is. Stuart, from a digital solution side, are you seeing anything come in, any other sort of data points? And we haven't really talked about, what are those core data points for, what does comfort mean? It's not just this subjective feeling, but, there are sort of these guideline parameters of what comfort means. So could you talk a little bit about where you see those guidelines or parameters? And then are there any other sensors or technologies that are being introduced to help ensure that we're staying within that dead band, if you will?
Yeah, it's almost hard to keep up with. So, there's different ways to do it, right? Some owners will use workplace surveys, right? So there's usually an app, right? There's usually a workplace experience app, and those apps usually have a survey feature, right? So that you can use the survey as one. I've seen some innovative things in conference rooms, almost like when you're in a bathroom, red, yellow, green, where you can comment. So I've seen that. The sensor technology, it seems like every 6 months there's a new latest and greatest sensor. Many more variables are being added to those sensors, right, into one device. Those are all becoming IoT technologies. Then you get into the conversation of, a lot of customers want to take those sensors direct to cloud and bypass the building automation system. Sometimes they hijack the BAS network, but they still bypass the BAS server. We see that a lot, right? And those networks really weren't designed for the traffic, so it starts creating all these problems. But from a data perspective, managing it, I think the other part of the conversation is multiple data sets, right? So I think as an industry, we haven't solved it yet. One of the conversations at Realcomm, I think it was Joe Lewis was interviewing Joe, and Joe said there's couple hundred software vendors out there, and we've all expected the M&A. We didn't see as much of it this year as we thought we were going to see, but kind of everyone sees the M&A coming because there's just too many point solutions, right? So I like to say that that occupancy is probably the number one variable in the building, related to comfort, but kind of different, right? It's related to comfort in the sense that how do you measure comfort on a floor? Do you have one employee or do you have 200 employees, right? Kind of makes a difference on how you're going to measure the comfort. So you need to know the occupancy. The problem with occupancy is there's so many devices and software functions out there. How do you correlate multiple data sets so that you can get that visibility so the occupancy information doesn't just get stuck in one point solution or software platform? And of course, everyone wants to get the occupancy data out of the security system, physical access security systems as well. So I think that's what's changing in the market is, we used to look at things through one use case or maybe 2 or 3 use cases. Now there's this ecosystem of here's the 100 use cases that I want to solve, and you start looking at the integrations and moving the data around, and you get into this conversation around the data platform.
Yeah. Clifford, I've heard many times before that the best HVAC system is the one you don't know it's there. We were talking about it at the trade show this week.
Absolutely.
I forget the exact context of the conversation, but we were talking, and I asked the guy I was talking to. I said, "Well, is it hot or cold in here? Have you thought about that?" He was like, "Oh, I haven't thought about that at all." It's like, then the system is doing its job. It's like, so
score for the home team.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's yeah. Well, okay. Good job, Stuart. It is a Siemens building, but the whole aspect is that if you don't know it's there, then then it's right in the comfort zone, and then now you start to massage it and say, okay, how can we keep that zone while then reducing the energy usage? While making sure that we have fresh air. But then there's some of these invisible things that take place too. Another conversation I had was a guy, we were giving away KMC mints, and he was talking about how for the longest time he started dealing with these headaches, and he didn't understand why he had these headaches, and he just thought, I'm getting older, apparently I'm developing migraines, whatever it is. And he goes to the doctor and he tells the doctor about it, and he says, well, take a look at your diet. Has anything changed? And I can't remember if it was gum or mints, but it had a particular kind of sugar substitute in it that he was just kind of like, well, I'll just stop, using these mints for a while. I'll stop using this gum for a while. I'll stop drinking this drink for a while. And it went away, and he narrowed it down to there's this sugar substitute. And he was asking me whether that was in the mints or not. I was like, I don't know. Enjoy a mint and see if you get a headache. But, I think that happens in buildings too. There are not silent killers, yes, carbon monoxide or something, but something like CO2 can play a huge factor in the comfort inside that space. We also see that with something like lighting. If the lighting is too bright or too dim, if there's too much sunlight coming in and you don't have really anywhere else to go or work, if you have a particular kind of light or a temperature of light, there's all these other factors that can imply or that can impact comfort. So perhaps I just answered the question in the setup, but Clifford, I'm going to skip you. I'm going to go to Jesse. Jesse, are there any other factors that could be impacting comfort outside of what we would typically think around temperature or humidity?
Well, I think that the group on the call here has pretty well fleshed out all the different components that go into occupant comfort. If you come back to me, maybe I'll come up with another one. But
yeah. Well, I had run through my list, but now, yeah, go ahead, Stuart. Yeah,
I have one to add for you. So I watched a TED video. I believe the lady's name is Jessica Green. I'll give her a shout out. I've never met her before, and she did an amazing analysis. She's got a couple videos on TED. I forget which government department she works for, but they basically did an analysis of the bacteria and viruses in a building across different spaces, different ventilated areas, open windows. And so that almost seems to be a new frontier in this healthy buildings journey. Lee did a really good job of looking at volatile components, and everyone's aware now when you buy a piece of furniture or if you paint your wall that there's volatile organic components, and there's devices out there that can measure that. Some of those get a bit expensive. So now it's especially in a post-COVID world, Obviously, you can disinfect the air, but how do you measure, right? Can you measure down to these nanoparticle or these micron size viruses? So that's this kind of new frontier that I'm starting to see is viruses and bacteria in the building, and then how can that actually be measured? So we may see in a few years a wave of new sensor technology that can actually measure microbial organisms, which is pretty wild to say out loud, right?
Yeah, I know there's been some interesting innovations around Legionella, which obviously would impact your comfort. But infection transmissibility is huge. A lot of that came out of COVID. A lot of those
Yep.
conversations, things like BPI or bipolar ionization. How is that affecting a space or someone's well-being or someone's comfort in ways maybe they don't recognize or know. PM level or particulate matter levels, VOCs for sure. Um, when we talk about outdoor air and bringing that in, I've had some conversations around outdoor air sensors to help measure the quality of that, because you get something like a wildfire, and boy, I mean that's massive. And so now, how can we protect occupants inside, still maintain the comfort while still maintaining CO2 while not bringing in all that horrible smoke? Um, Allergies is another thing with filtration. That's something else. And the more filtration you add, the more expensive it is. The more you got to change it, and the energy efficiency. It's all tied together, right? And I'm not meaning to go on a rant at all here, but AI is another example where if we can make these small changes to efficiency while also saying, okay, we can maintain comfort, because we're predicting a lot of what you were talking about, Jason. We're predicting about what's going to happen in the future, and now we can have those tighter controls, tolerances on what we do, and far above and beyond what anyone can sit down and program for any short amount of time. Okay, so Jason, I'm going to come back to you. What about industries? What are some of the industries, focusing on our topic of comfort, where comfort is a high priority versus maybe some industries where it's a low priority?
I'm not sure who exists with the low priority, but I think, this isn't necessarily recent. However, I think schools like K through 12 is an interesting, how many in the areas in the states where we live, how many of them had heat but not cooling? And nowadays you get that bond money, and now you're adding cooling to a school. So that's a pretty major change. I mean, the little bit older people or whatever, they went to school without AC, and now it's like, that's a travesty, and we're torturing the kids. And there's, frankly, in many of our markets, schools will close on a hot day if the AC isn't working. We get cranky customers in commercial buildings and government buildings, but they typically don't get sent home because of lack of comfort. But that's been kind of, I think, more of a decade trend, but one that certainly is noticeable to us because it's a great amount of opportunity too. Implementing retrofits of that kind can be frustrating, certainly. Adding a different comfort technology to a building that was never built to have it, has its own challenges. I think one of the other ones that's super interesting to us would be kind of on the agricultural side, or I think about these schools, high ed, that have these buildings where they're studying and working on animals, and the amount of energy, technology, sophistication that we put into those facilities to ensure that, lack of a better term, the mice and the rats are comfortable or aren't being affected by any possibility of the comfort affecting what they're studying, is super fascinating to me, because I would say they're the most sophisticated systems that we get involved with. And so we're really throwing a lot of energy into that side. And certainly when you get on the industrial side where things just have to work or bad things happen, go to our mega jobs, the data centers, things have to that comfort level has to be kept. Otherwise, you got computers going down and whatnot. So that becomes ultra critical, right? I don't know that I have an answer for you about who doesn't care. Seems to me you got to travel outside the United States or North America and go to some other countries where they're like, yeah, 80 is fine. And it's just not fine here, right? So
I can think of, you mentioned agriculture, and I remembered an application around tomatoes. And what they would do is they'd pick the tomatoes and they'd bring them in, they'd sort them, and they'd have to ripen them in this facility. And the zone for ripening was not what we would call comfortable,
right.
but they had to keep it at a certain level, and then they were pumping in some additional gas that helped ripen these tomatoes further. So in that case, you were controlling the environment. Comfort was not the priority because that was not the purpose of the system. And then you mentioned livestock. That's really fascinating, because their idea of comfort may be very different than our idea of comfort. And then any other kind of maybe refrigeration, we're trying to keep food cold or something from spoiling. Comfort's not the focus of that, but it's not really a vertical as much as it is like a use case or an application. Yeah, Stuart, what do you think? Is there anything that comes to mind with where's comfort highly prioritized versus not prioritized at all?
Yeah, a few thoughts. It's kind of almost it's vocabulary, right? So there's maybe there's a difference between comfort controls and environmental controls, which that's not really a term that we see anymore, but it was, it was a popular term years ago. And so what I'm thinking, the use cases in my head are, I spent most of my career in healthcare and life sciences. And so one of the lenses that I've always looked through the world is every critical space in the world kind of has the same four parameters from an HVAC control perspective: temperature, humidity, pressure, whether it's positive or negative, and what's the air changes. And so whether it's an OR, an FDA regulated laboratory, museums are a spot where they're very, very tight environmental control requirements. They're not regulated, but they're required because the pieces of art could be multi-million dollar pieces of art. And so, maybe there's a distinguish between comfort controls and environmental controls. And so in the environmental control space or use case applications, that is the priority. Whereas in some of the regulated spaces, reliability or uptime is the priority. And in fact, we were talking to a military commander a few months ago, and he said basically mission readiness is the priority. Everything else is subsidiary. Same thing. We have a big ships business where we do comfort controls on ships, cruise ships, whatnot. And everyone's familiar with central plan optimization strategies these days. And the captain of the ship this is a true story. Captain of the ship has a button on his ship that says when he wants full speed, turn off the plan optimization, right? So there are things that will trump energy savings and comfort. And so I think that's part of understanding your customer, understanding the vertical market, understanding the use case of the space, because it does shift the priorities and the conversations with the customers and how you structure the programs.
So Clifford, you've put together quite a few controls projects yourself, in a past life and some of the work that you're working on now. What are some ways that maybe you've sort of dipped into the comfort zone a bit to save energy? Is that a common practice where, hey, you may not be quite as cold as you want, but you're cold enough? And, has that ever happened to you? How have you balanced between comfort and efficiency?
Yeah, that happens quite often. As a matter of fact, we were sitting there talking about this. It reminded me of a conversation with the HVAC design engineer I had in Houston, and Stuart is familiar with this and where he's at as well. And we were talking about temperature control and where he wanted to be, and he basically said, "I don't control it to comfort. I control to remove water, and everything else will take care of itself." Because we were trying to talk about energy strategies and different things like that. Because the comfort is all relative to where you're at as well. Comfort in like Jason was talking about in the markets that he serves, they didn't have HVAC before, and now they're adding it. And I didn't have HVAC growing up in West Texas as well, and now I can imagine life without it over there. But so it's relative. So, but now that everybody has it, there is that requirement for balancing the energy. And I lived in California for 16 years and did contracting out there. There's standards in place to balance out that energy. They only, I think, if it's a government or any kind of publicly funded facility, it only can cool to a certain level, heat to a certain level. There's the air change rates, which was Stuart was bringing up before about maintaining that air change rate. That's the indoor air quality savings, but the ability to offset that by monitoring your airflow, outside airflow conditions, to bring it in for indoor air quality to maintain your air change rate, but also not over ventilating and wasting a bunch of energy depending on your climate. So it's a constant battle, and it's something that when I think of comfort, when we first started comfort management systems, what is that? It's not just the building automation system that Siemens and KMC and Long does. It's also the design of it, the distribution of the air and the ventilation and everything else. It's the equipment that gets selected, which Jason's team is quite familiar with as well. So it's the entire thing that goes into a comfort management system per se, not just the sensors and the widgets and things like that, in my estimation, when you look at it. So, yeah. Hopefully that answered your question on.
That was really great. Jesse, do you have any thoughts specifically around that same concept of balancing comfort and efficiency, maybe differences in different regions? Is there anything to add around that?
Well, I mean, the first thing that really comes to mind is economizer control. I mean, we've seen economizer control as a primary go-to in the industry for balancing energy efficiency with code required amounts of outside air or air exchange rates that are entering the building. And what is almost consistent across the board is that when we're economizing, and for I guess maybe anybody that's watching that isn't familiar with the concept, we're bringing in ambient air that can basically offset the need to do mechanical heating or cooling when the precise conditions exist outdoors or outside of the built space. That just allows a system to operate more energy efficiently. But there are some downstream or even upstream concerns that need to be managed, like you'd mentioned earlier, smoke. Wildfire smoke. When we have conditions where there could be poor ambient air quality, then using that economizer strategy to offset the cost of mechanical cooling to affect comfort management becomes problematic. And I think we've seen, the engineering community, particularly, in ASHRAE standards like 62.1, specify the use of other remediation methods or other methods to, affect that indoor air. So, specifically in the latest release of 62.1, they're using an indoor air quality ventilation procedure in addition to dilution of indoor air with outdoor fresh exchange rates. And again, that's driven more from the concept of managing indoor air quality. So there's obviously some balance that needs to be taken into consideration when you're looking to marry code minimum required ventilation or any type of goals that are built around indoor air quality with efficient operation of a building automation system. So don't know if that answers your question entirely, or maybe spurs the conversation in a different direction.
No, I think it's great. No, I do have a question. This will go now to Jason. Jason, and you can speak specifically to the local school district you work with quite a bit if you'd like, or you could just speak in more general terms. But have you seen any correlation between the impacts in the education sphere when you're providing a healthier, more comfortable environment, and how that can impact something like performance or children that are not missing school as much or anything like that. Have you had those kinds of conversations with any of your clients?
We absolutely have the conversations. I think to speed ahead to the end, the where it falls down is I don't know that there's really any data that we really get back, but we talk about it quite commonly. You got to have some talking points when you're raising money from your community to do stuff. So you got to say, hey, we're going to make improvements to this school, and it's going to keep your kid in the classroom. Like, they're not going to go home because it's hot. They're not going to not learn or hear the teacher because the piece of equipment in the room is loud. They're not going to get sick because it's super dry air. We've got a humidity level or most of the rest of the world where the humidity is too high. So there's all those things that are talked about, and I think are designed to, and we work to make sure that we're doing all that. I'm not sure that we in our end of the industry get the real data feedback to say, yep, look at that. That school had an average of 2 kids a week going home, and now it's 0.5. I haven't seen it to that, detail. But it's super important stuff. Unrelated to your question is just something, as we were talking, that's a really interesting part of where I think comfort is right now is the blending and the mixture of the HVAC equipment and the controls. And where I'm going with that is factories, more and more manufacturers have factory mounted controls. They're sending out, let's just say in this example, a large rooftop that has a controller on it, which would allow that rooftop to do most things it needs to do all by itself. And then we have a community of us as SIs and engineers and designers that are writing sequences and saying, this is how we're going to take care of this building. This is how we're going to deal with the outside air. And then we get on the job, and what we've written in our sequences and what can happen with the controller from the manufacturer are 2 totally different things. And that ends up being an interesting and often difficult thing to implement and keep everybody happy, because a lot of times you can't do the sequence perfectly because the rooftop controller won't let it happen, and vice versa. So I don't know. That had popped into my head when somebody was speaking to something earlier, but.
No, that's really interesting. And again, it's sort of these behind the scenes kind of things that could happen that ultimately affect the outcome. And you got to get creative, but you got to have the knowledge behind that creativity to really make it effective. Stuart, what do you think? Comfort moving forward. Where does this sit? What are some of the impacts going to have, or anything else that you were just about to say?
Yeah, I was just going to tie it back to the fault detection and diagnostics, or right. We're all going to shift to ML-based analytics, right? That's what I was thinking while you were talking, is that, part of the, I've always seen the analytics, the promise of the analytics is to, and I'll throw out kind of a spicy question while I do this. This is just for fun. To me, the promise of the analytics is root cause analysis. And why is root cause analysis important? Customers may spend thousands of dollars diagnosing a problem, doing the investigation, right? Call the controls contractor, call the chiller guy. He says this, the electrician, the mechanic, right? But we've all seen the examples. And that can cost a couple $1,000s. That could cost 3 weeks. Meanwhile, the ultimate customer is suffering, right? Okay, so the machines get good enough at some point in the future and we automate the whole thing, right? Somebody still has to do the work. And so that's where I was thinking, but do we get that feedback from the customer? And I've seen examples where, let's say the service provider actually does a good job. It's almost more like PMO and KPI management, where there was a healthcare system in Houston where I basically spent most of my career that diligently tracked that, because they purposefully wanted to transition their reactive maintenance to proactive maintenance, and they successfully did that. They reduced their reactive maintenance and they shifted those FTE hours to do the proactive maintenance to decrease their deferred maintenance, right? I know I'm just kind of throwing a lot of terms out there. And so, but do we get the feedback as the service provider or the software provider? Not unless we ask for it, to your point. So it's a really good point to get the feedback if you want to do the case study and the reference and benchmark for the next customer. And then the other thought I had, and I'll just throw this out here for the audience since we have 5 minutes left, when the machines get good enough that they can diagnose the problem, because the reason the building automation graphics started was with Honeywell in the 80s, right? I live outside of New Orleans. Every building in New Orleans, Louisiana had a Honeywell system, and they had a carousel. You press the button and the picture would slide, and they had basically a light that would show the temperature value or the valve position. And that's where the graphics started. And it was all pneumatics, right? So when now the machines get good enough at some point in the future where they tell us the problem and they diagnose the root cause, the valve stuck, whatever, simultaneous heating, cooling, whatever the problem is, the economizer's not working. Do we need the building automation graphics in that world? Because they're one of the most expensive things to build on the project. No matter how much we automate the building automation design, that's still a heavy lift, right? So that's maybe my question for the audience is, in a couple of years, do we need the building automation graphics?
I would jump in and say no. And I think some of those conversations have started already.
Yep.
You know, on a budgetary thing, you kind of throw it out there and it falls on dead ears still today. But because they're like, well, no way, I'm not going to be the first guy that goes without, you know, my pictures. But as we're getting more and more into the analytics stuff, you know, now we're kind of 5 years deep into it. So we're really starting to learn a lot more. You find that you're not using it. The stuff we're using is the true, you know, we work with Clockworks. It's that true program is what people are going into and working on or whatever. We're not going back to our traditional graphics. So it's a super interesting thing you're saying, Stuart, and we have thrown it out there. It hasn't stuck yet, but it's not far away, I don't think. Eventually a school district owner or a large CBRE, you know, property manager is going to say, man, I don't need that on any of my stuff because I got everything up in the cloud and it's all talking. Why would I don't need to watch the fan spin.
Yep. We have financial customers with branch banks and then retail customers with big box stores. Neither one of those use cases. They're DX rooftops, you know, not always for the branch banks, but so that's already not there. So we'll see how far it creeps into the Class A office space or the corporate campuses.
You know, with KMC Commander, it's our cloud-based platform. We've resisted graphics, but we did see the value in floor plans. And so we've included floor plans. There's a lot of context that can be drawn from that. But, you know, we still get requests pretty often to include graphics. I just simply don't see it really as a future. But you talk about making people uncomfortable.
Now you might so you bring up it's the equipment graphics that are going to go away. The floor plan graphics are still relevant. Agreed. But then you still need to visualize the data. So do I need to see the valve position? No, but I still want to see the leaving air temperature of the air handling unit, of course. So just the visualization changes.
You know, it's like you just tell me how I need to order those tasks. What do I need to do first to save the most amount of money, to make the most impact, to reduce my hot cold calls, and then make sure that, you know, the tenant, if you're on the service side, that the tenant or the occupant or the client is happy, and you know you're going to get that service contract next year as well. I'll close it out here, guys. A couple of things that sort of surprised me in this conversation is I had not considered ahead of time pressure, Stuart, and you had mentioned pressure being an effect on the overall comfort. And then Jason, you mentioned audible levels. It's like, you know, if the unit is too loud and you can't hear it, I'm like, well, of course, I mean, that's a huge part of comfort as well. But then, you know, the conversation, so many times I think comfort, temperature, humidity. You know, it's like, that's just so much of it. Fresh air, CO2, am I tired? But those were some interesting things that I kind of pulled out of it. And I'm going to now try to remember that when anytime comfort comes up, to think of those additional aspects. And hopefully the audience will as well. Everyone here, really amazing conversation. Thank you so much for having it. I tried to work in the questions that we are getting into our conversation here, so we don't have any other questions to go through. Thank you so much. Look for this recording on YouTube in the next week or so. Jesse, Clifford, Jason, Stuart, thank you, gentlemen. Have a great weekend and a great rest of the summer. Stay busy. We'll see you guys.
Same to you.
Bye.